Okay, welcome. This lesson is going to be kind of a twofer. We're going to talk about two different things, but they do go hand in hand because when we're going to be talking about user input. So, namely, how do you make your programs more interactive to someone running it? So it doesn't just produce a bunch of text, a bunch of output. You actually make a program responsive. And wait for a user to type something in, and then you do something with their input. And we're going to talk about operations, which are kind of like, well, what might you do with these, with the input that they give you, and what can you do with numbers and variables in general with Java. So we're first going to start off with user input, and then go into operations next. Okay. So, up until now, our programs aren't interactive. We just run it, and it's going to produce a bunch of output, a bunch of text. So, if you want to get your programs interactive, we are going to use what's called the scanner. And that's just a picture of, like, one of those, like, scanners that you'd see at a grocery store. But scanner is this tool that Java has built that you can use to get input from someone. So in order to use this scanner, you have to import it into the program. And that's like the very first thing that you're going to do. Anytime you want to use scanner, we're going to add a special line at the top of our program that says, hey, Java, go find me all the code about scanners and other things too, and make it available to me for using in this program. Okay? So at the top of our program, we need to add this import statement, and you can see we're importing something from Java, and we're importing this thing called utilities, or util. Util is short for utilities. And then this .star thing here, what this does is it says, go ahead and grab all the stuff that's in the Java Utilities package. And there's a lot of things in Java Utilities that we're not going to be needing, but this is going to get everything, and will allow you to use those in your program. And this needs to go above the class header, and not inside the class and not inside the main. Your code should maybe have a comment at the top, and then the import statements, and then your public class, whatever the name of the program is. So this line is going to go up at the top. And it's called an import statement. As I said, this is import, and you can see that semicolon at the end, so this is a statement. And it's one of the only statements we're going to have. It's mainly the only one we're going to have that's outside the class. So we can import more packages, more things into our code, more things to use. And if you get pretty, if you go out and build code in the real world, you'll find you're going to be importing lots of other people's code all the time, because why reinvent the wheel? Someone has already written code to do something, and you're going to be using import statements to do these. Okay, so this gets you scanner for use in your program. Okay, so that's not the only thing you're going to need if you want to start using getting user input. The other thing is you're going to have to create a scanner object wherever you want to get the input. So, for example, if I want to get input in the main method somewhere, I've got to create the scanner before I start getting user input. And one thing to note is that you can use that same scanner as many times as you want. So you don't have to keep recreating a scanner every time you want to get input. You just make the scanner once, and then you reference it using its name, get it and use it as many times as you need to, as many times as you want to get input from the user. So what you would do, and I generally do this at the very top of main if I'm trying to, or whatever method I want to get input in, is I'm going to add it at the top of that method so I don't forget and try to use it before I've created it. And so you'll add this line, and it should look kind of familiar and kind of different. So there's some new things here. Here, I'm going to write on the slide, so hopefully this isn't super weird with the, you know, camera here. But so some stuff that's familiar should be, you know, this looks a little bit like string. It should remind you of string because it's capitalized. And then over here, this is actually a choice. This input, this is the name of our scanner. This is a name, and it can be anything you want it to be. I called it input because that's what it's getting. It's getting input. But you could call it console. You could call it SC, short for scanner. You could call it scanner with the lowercase s, but that gets a little confusing. And then we've got some stuff that's new over here. New. So we have this keyword new. Oh, don't forget there's that equal sign. So the equal sign. And we say new scanner. So again, that's the same as the name over there. Now this, okay. So this isn't string. It's just, it should remind you of string, right? Because it's capitalized. And then this line over here in the parentheses is basically saying where you want to get input from. So all the commands we've been writing for the most part have been system.out. So they've been system, you know, .out, .println, print, LIN, or something like that. And this system.out is saying print to the console, print out to the console. And so system.in is going to get in from the console. It's going to get, that's where it's saying get your information from. Because scanner could actually get information from a lot of different sources. It could get information from a file. It could get information from some text. It doesn't have to get it from the actual typing of the user on the keys. So just keep that in mind, because later on, if we do some file processing in this class, we're actually going to change right here what goes in those parentheses to something else. As I was saying, note this input right here is just a name. So this is just a name, and it could be anything. You might see it called console, you might see it called scan or SC or anything. So don't think that it's always going to be input. Okay, when you get input from the user, how does the scanner actually process things? Well, it's going to process these things by what are called tokens. And the tokens are, as you type into the keyboard or wherever the scanner is getting information from, it's going to look for white space. And the white space could be actually typing in the space bar and putting spaces between things. Or if you hit the enter key, that would be putting space into something. So it's going to take all the characters before the next white space, and that's going to be the next token. And so here's an example. If we have this string, remember I said you can actually hook a scanner up to a string, up to text, and then when you process this, it breaks it down into different tokens. So for this, we've got a token my, and then it's going to ignore that space, and then it's going to get the next token, which is age, and then it's going to get the next token, which is, and then the next token is going to be 4. So we've got 4 tokens in that text. So if you're looking for just one thing from the user, if they type in and put spaces, then it's going to ignore everything after that first space. It's only going to take the first chunk that they type in. And you might get some, try this out when you're actually pretending to be the user with your programs you write. Okay? One thing to note, this last 4, you could process that for either as a string, which is, with quotes around it, so then it would be like a 4 with quotes, or you can process it as a char, in which case then it would be, single quotes, or you could process it as an integer, in which case then it's the number 4, you know, and you could do math with that number. You can't do math with strings or with chars. Actually, you can do math with chars. I'll let you look up how to do that. We might talk about it later on, but there's some tricks you can do with char math. Okay, so if you want to get input, we haven't talked about how you actually get input using the scanner. You just have to specify what kind of input you want. What's the data type of that input that you're interested in? And it's really pretty easy to remember how do you actually, which of these calls you want to make, but they're, you know, the data type is in the title of is in the name of the call, the method call. And that's what all of these are over here. They're all method calls that you call on the scanner. So we've got input.next, input.nextInt, input.nextDouble, input.nextChar, input.nextLine. There's actually a lot of other things you can do with scanners too. This is just a subset of the things that you might find useful in this class. And some ones that are pretty important that you'll see, I'd say most commonly, are input.next, which is going to give you the next string from the user. And it actually stops at white space. So if you were to type in a 2-word name, such as David space Ackerman, then you're only going to get the first word out of that David if you do input.next. And then also a common one would be input.nextInt, which is going to grab you the next int from the user. Now if you're trying to get an int and you type in some other text, then the program actually is going to crash. And there's tools for handling that that error that might come up if the user types in something that you're not expecting. And later on down the line, we're going to talk about robustness. And robust means, like, you know, strong and capable of handling all sorts of possible cases. And in general, you want to make programs that are very robust and can handle a user that might do something unexpected. And your code should redirect them if they ever try to type in something that you don't want. But we don't have to worry about that just yet. We'll pretend like all of our users know exactly, you know, what we're looking for, and that we don't need to worry so much about a malicious user. Okay. A couple things to remember when you're using Scanner, when you're getting input. That last one that I mentioned we'll push to the side and worry about later, which is handling bad input. But we're always going to want to prompt the user, and usually to prompt them you'll write a print statement, some kind of system.out.print or println. You'll always want to prompt them for the information that you're interested in before you actually use that scanner method. And the reason why you want to do this is so that the user, when they're waiting to type, knows what they should be typing in. And you can also give clues as to what the valid things should be. Like, what are you looking for? If you're looking for a number, you might suggest them some numbers to type in. If you're looking for a word, maybe you suggest what kind of word you're looking for. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that you need to use whatever they type in. You can't just call that scanner method, because once you do it, if you don't do anything with it, it's going to just evaporate. The computer will take that information in, but then if you don't store it, you don't save it in a variable, or you don't print it or do something with it right away, then the computer forgets it because you didn't tell it to remember. And it's trying to be efficient and not remember things it doesn't need to. Okay? So here's an example of how you might do both of these things here. So we've got a prompt where we say, please enter your ID. So system.out.print, please enter your ID. And then on the next line, we've got this is kind of the new thing. So here's the variable that we're saving. It's an int, and we're saving it in a variable called student ID. And then here's the new thing over here this is our input.nextInt method call that's going to grab the next input or next integer from the user. And remember, this equals is directional, so it's going to take that input, whatever they type in, could be -1,000, it could be 0, it could be 505. It's going to take that and it's going to store it into that variable so we can use it later. And maybe we're, looking up some information about them in a system, etc., etc. So that's how you're going to use the scanner to save input from the user. Okay, so here's a little test yourself. I want you to write a complete Java program that's called Graduate. I'm just giving you a name. You can call it, you can call it whatever you want. Maybe you call this lesson, what are we in, lesson 6 or lesson 7? I guess it's lesson 6. That prompts a user for their grade and then tells them how many years they have until they graduate high school. One thing to note, you're going to have to do a little math here, and there's a couple strategies for how you can do this. You can either create a new variable that's going to be the thing you print over here. So you can either create a new variable, or you can do the math inside the print statement. And I'll show you how to do that in my solution. So I'll show you both ways in a minute. So go ahead and pause the video and get this all set up in IntelliJ. And then when you're done and you think you've got this output, or you're close to this, then go ahead and resume. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and actually program this along with you guys if you haven't already come up with an answer. So you could skip ahead if you figured it out and you just want to check your work, or if you got stuck and you didn't know where to begin. I'm going to go ahead and just write it out. So here's my program in IntelliJ. So what I'm going to do first, before I even start programming, is I'm going to write a comment at the top that's the expected output. So I have something that I can reference as I start writing this. So let's go back and look at the expected output. I want it to say, what grade are you? So what grade are you? And then it was parentheses, 9, 10, 11, 12, question mark. And then we have input here. And then the next line, if I go back, says you have some number of years until you graduate. So you have some number, I'm just going to put the number sign, years until left, is that right? Years until you graduate. So that's our output that we're looking for. So we'll just write, this is expected output, just so I have a reference of what I'm trying to go for. So here's the input that we're going to get from the user. We have a prompt ahead of it, and note the prompt that it's actually giving us some clues as to what the user should type in, 9, 10, 11, or 12. Now nothing prevents them from typing another number in, but I just want to kind of like get you guys thinking about, hey, like this is the input I'm expecting. I'm expecting them to do one of these 4 numbers. And if they do something else, some bad stuff might happen. Okay, so hopefully you guys remember the first thing we need, because we want to use scanner. We have to go and say, hey Java, go grab me the scanner from wherever it exists, which is actually in the java.util package. So this is our import statement, java.util.star. This is going to grab everything in utilities. You could also do import java.util.scanner, and that's going to grab just the scanner. But maybe you have multiple things you've got to use from utilities. For now, we just have scanner. There's other things that exist in there that might be useful as well. But we're going to import utilities like that. And then the other thing we're going to need is the creating the scanner. So here's scanner, and then we can call it input, but this could be Joe or it could be SC. So it's just a name equals, and then that new keyword, and you'll notice it turned a little bit blue, which is like the other keywords we've got, public, static, and void. What those keywords mean are just that you can't use them for your own names. They're reserved. Java doesn't let you name anything public, doesn't let you name anything class, new, static, void. There's a whole list of Java keywords that you're not allowed to use as your names. It's not that you can't use, you could say new input, that's valid, but you can't use the word new like that. This is not allowed. And you can see there's all sorts of stuff breaking in the code if we tried to name it new. So scanner input equals new scanner system.in, because we're grabbing information from the console. Now let's go ahead and prompt the user, right? So we've created our scanner, we've imported it, we're good to go. It's time to start asking for input and receiving input. So we're gonna prompt the user, system.out.print, what grade are you? 9, 10, 11, 12. And I want you to note that I did use a print instead of a println, because I want this input to be on the same line. If I used println, my input would be on the line below it. And I just kind of like keeping those things nice and close together so that the program is easier to read, and the inputs happen on the same line as the prompts. So here's our prompt. I'll go ahead and just comment that this is a prompt. Prompt, and then get input and save it somewhere. So we have to save it. So let's make the box to save the thing into. Let's make our variable first. We're asking them about their grade, and so that's an int. And let's name it grade, because that's a good name for this. It's a grade. We could have called it user grade or something else like that, but it should reference grade because that's what we're asking about. And now the next line where we use the scanner, so there's input dot, and then you can see there's a whole host of methods we can use. Input dot, and look at this. This is all the things you can do after you start typing next, and we want next int. So we're going to grab the next int from the user. And just easy to remember here. Whatever's over here, whatever you're processing, needs to be the same as this. So if you're grabbing a double, you're saving it into a double. If you're grabbing a string, well, this would be next. No, there wouldn't be a string, it would just be next. You're saving it into a string, okay? So these match up. So now we've got our variable, we've saved it into grade, and now we just have to use it in the last print statement. You have, and then it's a tricky little bit of math here, which it's not super challenging, but let's just figure it out. So if we go back to our expected output, if they type, let's go back, if they type a 10, we want to print 3. They type an 11, we want to print 2. They type 12, we want to print 1, right? So what's that? How do we get that from these numbers over here? So I'll let you guys think about it for a second. So if we type a 10, let me use the pen because this is better, then we want to print out 3. If we type an 11, we want it to print out a 2. If we type a 12, we want it to print out a 1. There's a relationship between these numbers. To get these numbers on the right from the numbers on the left, well, I just do 13 minus grade. Okay? Oops. Grade. So we can test it with a couple of numbers. If I put 10 in for grade, I get 3. If I put 11 in for grade, I get 2. If I put 12 in for grade, that gives me 1. So those are the values that we want. So let's go back to our program. We want to print 13 minus grade. And I want to just note that I used a parentheses around this because I do want it to, in fact, subtract these numbers before doing anything else. And then years until you graduate. Okay, so the parentheses are key. Let's see what happens if I don't have them. So if I don't have them, you can see that it's complaining. It's complaining because it's going to try to do this. It's going to glue these things together first, and then it doesn't know what minus is when you've got a string. So this ends up being converted into a string, and then you can't subtract a number from a string. So in order to do this math, then we need to put parentheses around it. So let's put the parentheses back in there. Now that's one way of doing it. Also, we could have done this, made a variable years left, and that's equal to 13 minus grade, and then we could use years left here instead. So let's go ahead and do it with that approach as well. So either of those ways will work. Okay, so this computes the number of years left. Sorry, my cats are fighting and going crazy. I hope you probably hear that. So this computes the number of years left and then prints it right there. So let's go ahead and run this program and see the output, see how it runs. We're building first, and then running. There we go. So this is what IntelliJ looks like when you've got a program that's waiting for user input. So you'll notice the program is paused. So we haven't yet executed line 25. We haven't actually executed line 24 yet. We're here waiting at line 23. We've printed out what grade are you in, and now we're waiting for the user to type something in. So now we're in the user shoes instead of the programmer shoes, and I'm going to say I'm going to be an 11th grader. So I'm in 11th grade, so I'm going to type 11 in, and then I'm going to enter the input with the return key or the enter key. So we'll hit enter, and then it prints out the rest of the code. So once we've hit enter, it goes on to line 24 and line 25, and then the program finishes. So that's the solution. Okay, so the next bit in this video is going to be about precedence, which is the kind of order of operations or priority that Java uses when you're evaluating an expression. So when you have an expression like this, you know, you have plus 13 minus grade plus years until you graduate. So you have this expression. How does Java approach this? Well, it's going to use PEMDAS, effectively PEMDAS, which is going to look for parentheses, evaluate those if there's any. It's going to do multiplying, dividing, and what's called modulus, which we're going to learn about in a little bit. It's going to do that before it's going to add and subtract. And when it does adding and subtracting, it processes the whole thing from left to right. So you can see why this is going to throw us an error. So when we go from left to right, we're going to glue on the 13 to you have, so you get a string that's the longer string, you have, oops, lowercase v, but what, or lowercase h, but whatever, 13, and then it's going to try to subtract from a string, and subtract is not defined for strings, so this is going to be the error right here, so that's bad. You can't subtract. So what can you do? What can you do? For strings, you can just add. You can just use plus, which glues them together. But for numbers, here's a bunch of things that you are probably going to be using this this year. Plus for adding, common. Minus for subtracting. The / symbol for dividing. The star for multiplying, and this percent sign, which is new. And the percent is what's called modulus, or mod for short. And what it does is it's going to divide the two numbers and take the remainder. So it's always giving you the remainder left over after you divide. Okay, so that's a little bit tricky. It'll be new for most of you guys, but it's a pretty commonly used operator in computer science. So now's the time to start getting used to it. Okay, so here's some examples of how you might compute the modulus. I'm just going to go over the mod operator on this slide so that we can get comfortable with it. So 7 mod 4, well, this is going to be the remainder if you divide 7, if you do 7 divided by 4. So 7 divided by 4 is going to be, you know, here's your 7, you're dividing it by 4. You can go in one time, so we take away 4, and there's 3 left over. And so this is going to be the result of 7 mod 4. That's going to equal 3. Okay? 10 mod 9, so this is 10 divided by 9, and then you take the remainder left over. So 10, and you're dividing it by 9. And so 9 is going to go into 10 one time, and what's left over, there's a 1 left over, so this is equal to 1. Okay? So you can almost think of it this way, like if you just start taking away this number on the right from the number on the left until you get the next number that's smaller than whatever's on the right. So, for example, 7 minus 4 is going to give you 3. And 3 is smaller than 4, so we're done. 10 minus 9 is equal to 1. And so 1 is less than 9, so we're done. So that's the answer. What about 5 mod 10? This one's a bit trickier. If you do 5 mod 10, what are you going to get? Well, if you do 5 divided by 10, you get 0, with 5 as your remainder. So this is going to be 5, because that's what's left over. How about this one? We combined a couple things. Well, it's going to do the parentheses first, like you would imagine in math. So it's going to add 1 and 2 together. So this is going to be 3. And then 3 modded by 3 is equal to 0, because there's nothing left over after dividing. That's, you know, imagine if you've got any multiple. So like 9 mod 3, that's equal to 0. 33 mod 3, that's equal to 0. If the number on the left is divisible by the number on the right, when you mod it, when you mod it by that number, you're going to get 0. So, for example, 81 mod 9 is 0, because if you divide 81 by 9, there's no remainder. Okay, so. All right, another tricky thing that is going to be new for most of you is how do integers work when you add and subtract and multiply and divide them with Java. Add, subtract, multiply is all typical stuff. Dividing is what's new. It's going to be tricky. It always truncates or removes the decimal and everything afterwards. So it just gets rid of the decimal. So whatever your answer would be, just look at that and then throw away the decimal, and you've got the answer. So 3 divided by 1. Well, if you divide that, you're going to get 3. So that's still just 3 because there's no decimals. The answer is 3. 3 divided by 2 would be 1.5, right? Typical math class. But we just throw away the rest of this. So what are we left with? Well, we're just left with 1. So it's giving you that bit. It's just giving you 1. No decimal. 3 divided by 3. What's that? Well, that's also 1. It's also 1 because, you know, any number divided by itself is 1. 3 divided by 4. Well, that's 0.75. 0.75. But now you throw away the decimal and everything afterwards. So let's throw that away. And what do you get? 0. So when you divide integers, if the number on the right is ever more than the number on the left, you get 0. For example, 9 divided by 10. Well, that's still 0. Okay, that's 0. Even though it's really close to 1, it's 0.9, technically. With Java, if you do this with integers, you get 0 as the answer. So something to be mindful of, something to remember. So it throws away the decimal. And then you might ask the question, what happens if you add an int and a double? What happens when you add those two things together? Well, if they're going to meet each other, the int gets automatically promoted to a double. So it gets a decimal even though it didn't have one before. And then your answer is going to be a double. Okay? So if you had 3.0 divided by 2, well, the 2 gets turned into 2.0. So this is basically 3.0 divided by 2.0, which is going to behave as you expect. It's going to get you 1.5. So this is 1.5 over here. 3.0 divided by 4, same idea. That would be 0.75. Because that 4 gets promoted to a double, and then you do double math. And you can always turn a data type into another data type through what's called casting. And that's where you kind of like, you say, okay, make a mold of the data type you want, and you put that in parentheses in front of whatever data you've got, and it converts that data into that new type that you give it. So for example, if you put double in parentheses in front of an int, that's going to just basically give you that decimal. It's going to turn it into a double, 5.0. If you put int in parentheses before a double, well, it's going to truncate it and throw away the decimal. So that would give you 3. It doesn't round, it actually just throws away the decimal. So int, 6.99 is actually just equal to 6 because it throws away all the decimal stuff. So that's gone, even though it's very close to 7. Okay, so that's the extent of this video. It was a little bit long, but hopefully you found it useful as we move forward with gathering user input and processing some data. See you next time.